Welcome to Perspectives with Mzu. In this podcast episode, I'm in discussion with Wandile Sihlobo. Wandile Sihlobo is Chief Economist at Agbiz, and he is a prolific writer. And today I'm going to be discussing with him a theme on writing, and in particular focusing on writing opinion pieces or features articles. Welcome, Wandile.
Thanks for having me on, Prof.
Great. I think the best place to start in our podcast this evening is just to explore your writing journey, how you use the art of writing and some of the triggers to your writing. You are a very prolific writer. You keep a weekly column on the Business Day. You also write regularly for Fin24. You write for Farmers Weekly, and you have articles appearing on the daily Maverick. How are you able to keep this up? What are some of your experiences as a writer? How did you start this art? What have been some of the triggers for you as a writer?
That's quite mouthful, Prof. But what I can say though is that there isn't a clear formula for me on how, and I will package this perhaps maybe in a few steps. The first thing, which is really at the core on why did I start writing the columns and all of these things that we typically put out. And that is a layered one, but in a sense, the first part I would say was the realization that the discussion about the agricultural economy and the agricultural sector, which is where I'm sitting, we're not there on a day-to-day use stuff that you read. It was really on dedicated niche agricultural publications. Yeah. And for me, the idea was that young people that are coming up, they need to really see what opportunities lie in agriculture. What do they need to understand? Where's their food coming from? And all of these things that are happening in the sector. And I think at the start of my writing, it was more of a descriptive analysis type of writing where I wasn't really expressing any bold opinions. If you go back to 2014, 15, in my writings on the Mail and Guardian, it was more for describing what we were seeing at this time. But obviously, as time goes by, the message begins to come in. There will be new trends that will be coming in agriculture, or certain things that are happening and you feel that they might impact the sector, or those that are in the sector should know about it, or general public should know about those issues. Either they're on policy, innovation, weather related. Then I would use the column to communicate those things, and sometimes to persuade people to say, hey, let's pay attention to a particular thing. It is happening and it needs your attention. So I would use it in various forms in those things. But I would say at the core was to bring agriculture to the front. But then as I continued, there's a number of conversations that came in line.
That's awesome. So you set out to bring agriculture to the fore of public debate. So you want to inform your readership about what's happening in agriculture. So would it be accurate to suggest that you write to inform and to educate, or are there other objectives that you set out to achieve as a writer?
I think it would be right to categorize it in that way for Prof, because it's really on that. I mean, there would be certain times, if you think back about land reform, when the topic was really on the mainstream, I wrote a number of essays there, sometimes with you, sometimes with Professor Johan Kirsten. And some of those essays, I would say, they were for persuading people for a particular point of view, while they would carry also, again, the element of wanting to inform people, which is why if you look at a number of my writing, it usually has a lot of data, which would try to persuade people using the numbers and showing some of the nitty-gritties of the sector. But I think the broad way at which you described it, that would be the accurate way of viewing when saying, how do I write? why do I write? I think you captured it succinctly with those words.
So in terms of your sort of signature identity as a writer, if you were to say this is what distinguishes you as Wandile Sihlobo, a writer who writes not only for the Business Day but across different platforms, what would that be?
I think my writing, Prof, would categorize itself by having a lot of numbers. My writing has a lot of numbers. And I remember the one time, I think it was in 2016, I was trying to do a piece for the FT, and one of the editors there kept hammering me on this thing, saying, you are too dry. You need to put a color on your writing. You can't only give us that. But I think it's proven to be difficult. And that's what, in the same way, makes my writings to be pretty much unique, because you can look through all of the columns that I write and all of the things that I write. It's usually having a bit of statistics that get in there. But what I try to do, though, while I including the statistics, is making sure that there is a story in between. And I try to write in as simple as possible, because one of the things that is always in the back of my mind is making sure that some of the people that are outside of this field, they get to have a sense of what is it that I'm talking about. So the story has to be somewhat compelling. But I think the uniqueness of my writing carries a bit more numbers, and then overlay with narrative. Hopefully I succeed on that, I don't know.
So you use storytelling to explain numbers.
I would say I try to use storytelling to explain the numbers, but I'm not sure if I succeed a lot on stories, but certainly on using the numbers, I succeed on that angle. And I mean, this, Prof, is also linked to some of the people that I admire, because one of the people that we know who's the best writer, at least for me, in South Africa in economics, Kandi Pai. I mean, he's one of the people that I admire his writing. But he has a great way of capturing you. Sometimes I don't agree with some of the things that he's writing, and I would think that if it was somebody else, I would have stopped reading the article halfway. But because of the way he tells his story, so compelling, even though sometimes you don't agree, you read up until to the end because of the joy of reading his work. And internationally, there are also some of the people that, I mean, we look up for inspiration. If you think of people like Paul Krugman, who are using numbers and graphs, but still they have a storytelling way. They have a certain way in which they put the message across, and for it to be compelling and engaging for a wider audience. And I think that's the way that everyone wants to strive on. Because if somebody is sitting in a bus and then they pick up your article, they should be able to follow where are we going with this story? What's the key message? So I learn and look at all of those people, and obviously look at what I'm doing, and then see what would be the best way, perhaps maybe, to tell this story. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't.
Yeah, you're right about Kandi. He has a unique way of conveying a story as an economist, not just in writing, but also in his ability to explain very complex economic thinking in very simple ways by telling stories. And I like this idea of communicating a message through telling a story, because I think as human beings, we relate better to telling a story. So we get gripped by stories, good stories. So to convey numbers or complex ideas using storytelling is a powerful way to, I guess, to reach the mind, or to get the mind engaged. Paul Krugman, I used to own a collection of his essays. I think when he first did his collection of all the articles he wrote.
The Conscience of a Liberal.
Exactly, The Conscience of a Liberal. I used to read it a lot because I was fascinated by how he is able to convey difficult issues in economics in very simple ways. I've also, like you, had people who inspired me, who were good with their pen. In the Financial Times, it's Martin Wolf and a writer who I think has since retired, Guy de Jongeres, who was head of the Asia Bureau of the Financial Times. They were able to really marshal powerful ideas in very, very simple ways and in very persuasive ways. Martin Wolf liked using a graph to illustrate. So in my earlier attempts as an opinion features writer, I used to copy his style a lot. It was not an easy thing. I don't think I ever succeeded, but he kind of acted as staircase for me to be able to build my own identity as a writer. Yeah, you want to come in?
Yeah, Martin is the best. I mean, he's classic. But I think the other thing that we are increasingly facing, Prof, as writers, is that, and which goes to the point where you say one has to try to persuade people in the argument. Because you, for example, yourself, you can't stand up in South Africa now on Twitter and say, hey, I'm head of School of Governance at Wits. Believe me, 1, 2, 3 is this. People will tear you apart on Twitter, regardless of what your credentials and where you're standing. Therefore, you need to have the ability of convincing and clarifying your argument so that they themselves can read and engage your information, then be in a position to make up a decision on that. But the time for you to be taken for a stroke one sentence that you say, that time has passed. You need to persuade people and have a bit of clarity in your arguments. And I think that's what we try, and a number of economists. I'm delighted in South Africa now. I see many people actually getting into that art.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I agree. I think the art of persuasion is an important part of writing. Another friend of mine who is also a writer, he says we have to conceive of writing in similar ways as delivering a speech or writing a speech to persuade the audience to the viewpoint you want them to embrace. It's really about persuasion, getting people on the side of your argument, or at least trying to show people a side of a phenomenon that they may not have been exposed to, and convince them that this is important. So just maybe taking a step back, how did you start to write? What kind of triggered you? What happened? Did you how, if you go back to your first attempt at writing or your first article, was it a letter? What happened there? What made you to say, I should be a writer, I should write, and how did you start?
Yeah, I don't think I actually conceived it in that way, Prof, where I was knowing that I was going to be a writer or anything like that. But I think the first piece of work that went out, it took me like, I think, a month or more than that to actually craft one 800 words essay, which came out on Business Day. And at the time, I was warning of the penning drought in 2015. And I was mentored by many people who helped me write that essay. Again, Kandipai was one of those people. Songes Ozidi, at the time, he was editing Business Day. Pagamisa Nzamele, he was also at Business Day. So I was leaning on the shoulders of the giants, and they were trying to help me put this piece together. And at the time, my writing was really dry academics. Not to say academics are dry, but it was that type of a writing, and not really conducive for the newspaper. But the key motivation was, again, to ring alarm bells of what was looming on agriculture, and I believe that there wasn't a lot of people that were paying attention to it. And a few months after I said that, we were hit by the drought of 2015 to 16. And in that time, then as the drought happens, the guys at Business Day, they needed more essays than on an area, saying, look, you are covering a niche area where we are not really receiving information from the people that are actually inside there, aside from having our reporters going and looking on this sector. And then they encouraged that I should be putting pieces to them. And I think at the time, the person who was editing the opinions and analysis was a guy called Kevin at Business Day. Then I worked with Kevin on giving them those essays. And then I think from there onwards, I just continued, and then it becomes part of you when you know that every now and then you have to be producing these pieces, and you begin now to be even more observant of your environment and picking up all sorts of things where you are able to link them with the bigger world and say, hey, people should be paying attention on this. And I think that it just continued from there on. But the first piece was really about warning about something that I was seeing important, and I think that many people weren't really looking at it at the time.
Yeah, I remember that time, and Kevin O'Grady was great. You know, he
yes,
was
that's O'Grady.
A very patient features editor, very encouraging, and and all that. That's awesome. And in terms of your, I think people who will be listening to this, I'm sure will have an interest in knowing your approach to the art of writing, the tools that you use as a writer, your writer's tools, the setting that you that you use to plan, prepare your writing, as well as to perform your craft. How do you prepare? What goes through your rituals for your articles? What are some of the habits that you hold on to? Yeah, the environment, the ecosystem of a writer, you as a writer.
Yes. No, I think there, Prof, there isn't a unique one. And maybe perhaps to link it to the point that we were discussing and saying, the first piece that I wrote took me a month. It took me a month to put together a readable 800 words. But it's crazy now when I look at what we are able to do at this point, because I believe now, I put up essays in less than 30 minutes, in 20 minutes to put together a column. But that's not where the process ends about. That's the process of taking something out of your mind and putting it in a piece of paper. But how my writing stuff comes about is, firstly, there has to be something that I want to say. And I think for anyone that is writing, the key thing is that we're not writing to have our names and our bylines on newspapers, but there has to be a message that you want people to get from your writing. That goes for respecting your readers, to say, why should people spend 5 minutes reading my essay? There has to be something that they need, they have to take out of that. And I think that once you have masters in it, once you have perhaps mastered the process of being able to come up with ideas, then the next step there becomes the one to say, okay, this is the idea that I want to put forward, but how best can I actually be able to put this forward to play on people? And what are some of the other people that have written about this idea? What are they saying about it? Then you begin now researching, say, is there anybody who has said something about this? What has their point of views been from what I am actually about to say? Is there any statistical evidence that is down here? Is it supporting my perspective, or is it against my perspective? And why is there that difference? And then finding nuance, then of bringing all of that evidence that is across, so that when people read what you are putting them aside, they can see that at least you have considered a wide array of some of the views and some of the information and the evidence that is out there. And then upon that, this is what you are coming up with. So I would say, firstly, it's the interest of saying, this is what I want to talk about. Thereafter, it's the process of reading up and consulting numbers on what are some of the things that are out there. Then the process then of taking all of that and putting it in a piece of paper is a much more easier process, because I've already formulated everything. Then that process can be about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. But the longer process that takes more than a day is actually writing on, because Business Day columns, for example, they appear on Wednesday. I file those on Tuesday, midday. But I start writing those columns in my mind on Saturday, Sunday, Friday, and where I'm beginning to notice certain things and saying, I want to write about this. what should I be reading? Who has said something useful on this? How do I begin this? Why should people care about this? So that process takes place on the back of my mind.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's also been my experience that the three, most important things for me as a writer have been preparation. You've got to be prepared. The preparation is critical. You can't just fire off an article. I mean, there are those rare moments of inspiration where you sit and ventilate. But usually, I mean, great articles are often those where you prepare. And secondly, that an article is written twice. It's first written in the mind.
Yes.
Either when you're taking a walk, or you are running, or you just lying, in bed, or you were reading a book, or you were talking to someone, and then a process of writing starts to happen in your head. And then thirdly, I found that reading is a powerful input into writing. And maybe we can pivot to that, and just to sort of get your views on the relationship between writing and reading.
Yeah, just before we quickly jump on that, I would say to the point, I mean, those that I have on Twitter, they know on Sundays, before the lockdown, of course, I would tweet things that I'm walking on Sunday morning. At those moments, that's where I will be writing the essay in my head. And then to go back to the process that you were saying of distilling your thoughts and considering the insights that's out there. But I think that, Prof, there's a second layer at which you are pivoting to of writing, because there's one way of having an idea and then of having considered what other people have written and seeing data and all of those things. But that begins then a difficult challenge of saying, how do you put it down in a more persuasive, easier to understand, and very succinct way? Because some of the newspapers like Business Day, the olden days we would write like 800 words columns. Right now you have about 600 words column. And no matter what you want to say, you have to shrink it to those and be able to get all your message across. And I think the art of doing that, at least for my part, comes up with reading a lot of stuff. And I mean, the reading that I have is in different ways. I read academic papers like any other researcher that's out there, and I would obviously stack on a weekly basis about which new research is coming up. And there's a way there you are reading to gain knowledge, but I think the practice of reading other people's work in one way or another, subconsciously, it improves your writing skills also. And then the second point is obviously reading other books that are out there, but obviously fiction books are the ones that people say they help in improving your writing. And I think for me also that has helped, because I read other things that are outside of the discipline that I'm in. But I think on the last point is also reading what other people are writing, because you can't be writing columns and expecting people to read your columns, but you don't read other people's columns. So every morning I would look up on the FT what people are saying on a Sowetan, the Business Day, and read what other people are doing. And I think that process of reading a lot, more than the knowledge that you accumulate, but I think it helps you now, it becomes easier for you to actually put down some really good sentences. And I think that's the art. And I would want to also know from you, because I mean, you're one of those people that we look up to on construction of sentences that are really good way, I don't know, how do you do that process, and how did you improve your own process in that? Because I mean, we admire your writing.
Well, not an easy. Thanks, Wandile. I mean, as I said, when I started out, I would copy writers that I admired, that I look up to. So, which meant that I would read lots of opinion pieces to see how people start their sentences. I was always curious to understand, why does someone start a sentence in this way? Why does someone start an opening in this way? Why does someone end a column in this way? So I would think about that process. And in thinking about that process, I was, in a sense, forming my own views on openings and endings, because those two tend to be very difficult. Over time, what happens is that it becomes really very difficult to teach writing. The reason why it's difficult to teach writing is that the repertoires that you develop over time become embedded in your subconscious. They become second nature. So when you write, you're not thinking about the art of doing it. You're just doing it because of many years of experience and practice. Moving through that journey, you start by imbibing other people's work, and then you slowly develop your own identity, and you develop an understanding that you don't write an article once. For an example, I go through an article that I write at least 5 times. The first time is to write the article until I complete a draft. The second time is to interrogate my article. Why am I presenting ideas in the way I present them? Why am I opening this way? So that is where I fix my intro. That is where I fix the flow and coherence, and that is how I fix my flow towards ending, how I end the article to maintain consistency across. The third time I write the article is to write it for coherence. That is to be sure that everything hangs together. The fourth time I write it is for language. Can I use a better word here? Am I being repetitive? Am I using the same words over and over again? Is there a way to recast the words that I'm using? Can I get rid of other words because they get in the way of the punchiness of the article? And the fifth time that I rework my article is to prepare it for the editor so that there are no typos. It's smooth, it's elegant, because I don't want sub-editors to do more work than they should do. I want them to be able to focus on the critical parts of the story. I don't mind being edited. I don't really, I've learned to defer to those with editorial authority, but I want to be sure that the product that I give you is elegant. It's not messed up by typos or bad language or that sort of thing. But it takes a while. I still observe those disciplines today. I will never write an article and send it off to an editor without going through it 4 to 5 times. And and I still give my article to others to read it and to critique it. I give it to you. I give it to someone like Isaiah Mhlanga. I give it to Mills Soko. So there are people that I would ask to comment on my articles and to give them license to be as critical as possible. And then I integrate those.
Yes, no. Sorry to cut you there, Prof. But I don't want to lose that point that you are saying, because I think it's very important, especially for people who are starting up writing, because they will typically see a last piece that is appearing on Business Day, Financial Times and stuff, and think that it's the first piece that you craft, and then it appears like as it is. But there's a lot of investments that goes into it, those processes that you are explaining now of thinking if the story makes sense and all of those things. And funny enough, I would have 2 ways on my writing. I would, after then I've satisfied myself with any of the op-eds, I would give it to you or give it to Isaiah to review. But there's one person that they never escape. There's my younger cousin who's still at university. And she's studying microbiology. But I would send her these essays, and there's only one thing that I always try to, and I'll say, hey, can you read for me this and correct the language and stuff? I hope she doesn't listen to this podcast, because I always say, your edits are very helpful. But the only one thing I want to know, I let her read and comment, and then after 2 hours, I would call her and say, hey, Siso, is the message clear? What am I saying on the article? And then she would tell me. The moment I see that she's not really getting it, that's where I go back to my story to say, I need to be crystal clear so that my younger cousin who's studying microbiology can get a sense of what I'm saying without actually any effort. She needs to be able to grasp it that, oh, you're saying 1, 2, 3, and then I'll be able to. So I test the understandability of my work largely by passing it to her, and obviously for Riga, by passing it through yourselves and Isaiah and the other people to help on that. But I think that message for someone who's starting to write up a piece, the key thing to take home is that it is okay to let the people that are in your close proximity assist you in looking on some of the other blind areas that you might have missed. The work that you see out there is not always an individually waking up, crafting this work and letting it printed. It's really cumulative work of many efforts of making sure that the reader gets the best possible product that can come out of our pens when we're putting the work.
Great. I mean, one of the things that I learned from Isaiah, for an example, is he challenges you to explain yourself in very simple ways. It cuts out all the words that are convoluted
Yes.
or that are difficult, and say, why don't you use a simple word here? Because writing really is about communicating in order to be understood. It's not about being obscure. What's the point of being obscure? It's not about using big words. It's not about confounding the mind. It's not about appearing smarter than anyone. But it's really is to communicate in order to be understood in very simple ways without being simplistic.
Yes.
That's the point of communication, is to be understood. Otherwise there is no point to put pen to paper. And sometimes that's where academics struggle, because sometimes in academia you write to be obscure. You use big words and concepts that are complex and that sort of thing, jargon. So writers have to be careful of jargon, avoid convoluted words or convoluted sentences, and just keep it simple and straight. Because the power lies in the idea and in the
I think simplicity, Prof. Even now, when I'm thinking on an academics way, there is a way to have simplicity and clarity in your writing without actually losing the rigor that's necessary. And I think that's what many people have to try to strive on. Because if now, as an economist of an organization, I'm writing up an academic paper, there is something I want to communicate to whoever is going to be reading this work. Yes, I decide to do it in academic paper because there's certain theories and stuff that I want to prove. But at the end of the day, the outcome, I want certain people to understand that. Then why do I have to make it then as super obscure to the extent that, yes, many people will understand in that space? It takes effort. You don't want your work to take too much from the reader. The hope, I'm not saying I'm personally even there, but the hope is that when I'm putting something on the paper, it should not take that much of people that they are reading. They should be able to slowly grasp. So the key is simplicity wherever you are writing on.
Precisely. Any final points to those who are aspiring to be writers of features, articles, opinions, and to be columnists? What are your final thoughts, words of advice?
I would say, Prof, if one wants to be a columnist or on a writing, the key thing is reading. Because that, as we said earlier on, it improves the way you are able then now to deliver your ideas on a paper. But I think then if you're writing the column, it's also making sure that you are up to date about the current events that are happening at the time. And also just knowing why are you writing, what messages, what big ideas do you want to get across, and being clear on that. Then the writing is the process of delivering the ideas that you already have. And the ideas come through reading, interacting with people, and various experiences that you get. And then the writing and the publishing process is just the platform getting those across. So strive to have some ideas, strive to have experiences. And I think, and when you have produced your first piece, if you think that is not as good as the next person, all of these things get better with time. Don't be hard on yourself, just keep working. And over time, you'll be good.
Wonderful. That's the best place to end our conversation, which is part one on writing. So we will be looking at having other writers on the show to get their own experiences on writing. Thank you so much, Wandile, for your time.
Thanks for having me on.